Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Musical Prisms podcast. This is Wayne. I am here with Tara from Spinnin Prog today. So before we start off, I'm going to introduce my guest. She is the debutante of the dark, the seductress of song, the host of Face the Strange on Prog Radio, one half of the Prog couple, the siren of Spinnin Prog, the Irish lass with so much sass she could kick even Chuck Norris's ass. Miss Tara O'Reilly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Wayne. I'm very flattered. I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I'm really looking forward to this. And that intro was fabulous. Thank you.
Not a problem. I figure with all my guests going forward, they're all going to get really over the top, those UFC kind of intros. So anyway, today we're going to be here talking about the album Fallen by Evanescence.
Woo!
So Tara, how did you get into this album?
So when I was, I'd say about 10 years old, I got very interested in alternative fashion. So I was intrigued by like gothic girls and stuff like that. And I somehow came across Evanescence. I think my older brother might have shown them to me. I can't remember. He used to watch this music channel called Scuzz TV. It was very big in the UK and Ireland. And they would come on there like all the time. And he was like, check out this girl. Amy Lee is her name. She's really gothic and you're into all that stuff now. So have a look. And I was hooked. It was the video for Going Under. Okay. And I was like, oh my God, I am so intrigued by this girl. The music is really strange. Her voice, I've never heard anything like it before. And from there, I just dove straight into the music. And I've been a massive fan ever since.
Awesome. So I came into Evanescence when they actually came out. Because I remember I was, oh God, what grade would I have been? I think I was grade 9 in high school. And I remember around this time, there's 2 songs constantly being played on the radio. One was Bring Me to Life by Evanescence. And the other one is Something in the Head by Tattoo.
Okay.
What Something the Girl Said or something, I believe is the title of that song. And those 2 songs,
all the things she said, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I know.
And those 2 songs were constantly being played on the radio. But something about Evanescence always struck me, especially Bring Me to Life had such a cool feel to it.
Yeah.
So a little bit of information about the album. It was released March 4th, 2003, classified as nu metal, alternative metal, and goth metal. It has sold 17 million albums worldwide, which nowadays sounds like a lot. And even back then, like if you can sell over 1 million, you're doing pretty good as a band.
Yeah.
Number 1 on countless charts across the world. And yeah, it's just the 4 singles are actually surprisingly the first 4 songs on the album.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because usually whenever an album comes out with singles, they're usually sprinkled throughout. But for it to be your first 4, pretty strong.
Yeah, they had a great start with it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the album starts with Going Under. I know you talked a little bit about that song.
Yeah.
Just what do you think of, like, let's say the album as a whole? Like, let's get into the album as a whole. What are your thoughts on it?
I love Evanescence. This album is a very iconic album, but you can really see where Ben Moody had his say and kind of pushed it towards mainstream music, because after this Amy Lee kind of took the reins, and like the music didn't change too much, but that like mainstream kind of appealing to a huge audience went away, and it was more for people like me and you.
Yeah.
So I don't reach for this album as much as I used to when I was a kid. But but it's still a very strong album, and there's a lot of very poignant themes in it. I mean, Going Under being about like a toxic, abusive relationship, and then Bring Me to Life, it's like, you know, realizing what you've missed out on while in that relationship. Of course, My Immortal being all about grief and, like, you know, being haunted by someone and they won't go away. And Everybody's Fool, then, like the sexualization in mainstream media, you know, it's really like to have those four as singles and to be such a strong and, how would you say it, like very like negative connotations behind the concept of the song. Like to have that go mainstream is very unusual, especially for the time. And I think that's definitely something that they should be proud of, you know, to reach such a wide audience with songs like that. Um, as far as concept goes, it does go kind of all over the place. It doesn't really kind of flow like a prog album would say, or other metal albums would. But it's still very good, and for a first album, it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I remember listening to this and going back listening to this. I was actually shocked how much electronic elements
Yeah,
entered into this album as well. And the strings, like that is something where, as prog fans, we're used to that a lot,
yeah,
is having like strings, big choral arrangements, even in some of the later songs where they actually bring in a choir.
yes, yeah. Even the way the album ends with Whisper,
Yeah,
it's strange. It's really odd, but it's really cool.
it is. It's one of those albums. I know you're a huge prog fan.
Yeah,
When I listen to My Immortal now, I'm not sure if you've ever listened to Harmonium.
yeah, yeah. I have. Yeah,
They have a song called I wrote it down here. Got a Lay Autumn, I believe it is, or
right.
something like that. It's the autumn part of the Five Seasons album. And I swear, listening to that and listening to My Immortal, there is some similarities between those two songs,
Okay. Yeah,
especially with the whole time cannot erase
yeah.
part. Like the melody is so similar in
Mm,
those. But
yeah. It was
so,
probably heavily influenced by it.
yeah, other thing I found actually really interesting in this album is the lyrical concepts, like you said,
Yeah,
how they're all over the place. And I always felt, and I could be completely wrong about this is how my mind kind of works about this kind of thing. I always thought this album should have started with Bring Me to Life.
yeah. I agree. Absolutely. Yeah,
Because
I've always thought that.
like it's kind of the same feeling I get with Dio's Holy Diver.
Mm.
That Holy Diver should have started that album because of the way the intro
Yeah,
fades in.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it would have worked with for Evanescence on this as well, because that kind of haunting sound would have bookended it with
Yeah.
Bring Me to Life and then Whisper the way that ends, you know. So yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
I'm actually really shocked that I read that they wanted out Amy Lee wanted nothing to do with the rap rock
Yes, yeah,
part
she
of that
was
song.
fuming over that. Yeah.
But I seen them live and there's something missing when it's not there. Like
Yeah.
it's one of those where you listen to it and you're like, even when she's trying to do kind of both parts live, it just misses. You grow up kind of listening to it a certain way, and then when
Yeah,
it's not,
I hate to say it as well, but the record label were right about that. It
yeah,
really did help it.
yeah. Like other parts of this album, like it's interesting going back and listening to these, like especially Evanescence. You can definitely hear the new metal,
Yeah,
which I agree with them. They weren't a new metal band. They were kind of their own separate thing. They really weren't any one thing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's where I find a lot of bands nowadays try to be just one thing.
Mm.
Like you get, especially in the metal sphere.
Yeah, they get this label and stick to it because it works for them. But Amy Lee was always about pushing the boundaries, and she didn't want to be caught in this bubble. Like, she always wanted to try different things, and she really proved that as well with the way Evanescence went after Fallen. With
Yeah.
the open door and even synthesis, like that was a really bold move to just come out and do a strings album. So yeah, I agree. I would not put them in the new metal category.
And it's really weird that I was doing a lot of research for this, and they don't even really like being classified as goth either.
Yeah, yeah, but
Which,
I mean, look at her, for God's sake.
yeah,
That's a goth.
I understand as somebody who, like when I was about, oh God, 10 years old, I remember Columbine and the vilification of anything that is different. If
Mm,
you're not a certain way, you're kind of like pretty much like the bullying got worse, the media around it got worse. So I can kind of see why they didn't want to paint themselves as goth. But
yeah,
you can also see, in a weird roundabout way, like the European symphonic metal elements coming in. Like Evanescence is kind of, I think, the band that opens people up to a lot of that stuff.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's just so unusual. Like I said, you don't hear anything that sounds like Evanescence. Like, they
No,
really are just in their own little genre, and it does open them up to a much wider audience.
yeah. The one band I wrote down here that I really did think that it kind of reminds me of is like a female led Typo Negative.
Yeah, actually. Oh my God, I never thought of it that way, but yeah, absolutely. Except without the kind of what I call typo negative is sex essential dread. And I
Yeah,
would say Evanescence don't have that, but they do have a similar sound, yeah.
yeah, like getting into like Ben Moody's guitar, like it does feel a lot like that typical early 2000s guitar tone.
Yeah, it makes you think of like Disturbed and all those bands.
Yeah, and I think Amy's what really set this band apart because unlike a lot of those, let's use Nightwish for example, where it was that operatic vocals heavily influenced there. With Evanescence, it felt like it was a little bit more rock
Yeah.
in there where the mainstream could get behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, she always would like sit down at a piano and write the music herself. But she always wanted to have this kind of rock band in behind her. It's odd, and I mean her music. Like I said, she'd be sitting at a piano writing it, and the music would reflect that in what it's about. I mean, she did a lot of like which one on Fall. My Last Breath is about like the victims of 9/11,
yeah,
and she sits down, does this gorgeous song on a piano, and then puts a rock band in behind her on it. Like, it's so unusual.
yeah, like songs like that, My Last Breath, Whisper, like ending with that choir, having like these big kind of almost string arrangements throughout, which does lend it to that gothic
Yeah.
kind of feel. Like
Hmm.
another way to describe it would kind of be like, well, kind of that early 2000s. You had movies like Blade, you had Underworld,
Yes.
all
Yeah.
these very,
It's kind of cyber goth,
yeah,
industrial goth kind of direction. Yeah. And I mean, even the image on the front of the album very much reminds me of cyber goth.
yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. They were going in that direction.
And I've been really thinking about what made Evanescence, and I really think it is Amy Lee, and
Yeah.
I think it is like the image of Amy Lee, the music videos, everything, and quite honestly, like a lot of guys I knew growing up, and even girls I knew growing up, all said Amy Lee is hot.
Yeah. She is hot. She's
Yeah,
still hot. Like, she's had kids and everything, and she's
yeah.
still hot now. Yeah, her image just brought the band to another level. And she used to make all of her own costumes. Everything you've
Wow.
seen her wear on stage, in music videos, everything, she made all of that herself. Which goes to show the lengths she was willing to go to make this band successful.
Yeah, the one thing I was reading about that absolutely astounded me is that some of these songs she wrote when she was like 15, 16.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's fantastic. I was obsessed with her when I was a teenager, and I used to stay up all night watching documentaries about her on YouTube. And just hearing her talk about her influences, like, there's not really any rock influences behind her. Like, it's all classical and opera music.
yeah,
And like, for her to take that and turn it into Evanescence, like, she's very clever to do
very
something
much
like
so.
that, and it definitely worked anyway.
Yeah, like some of these songs, like Haunted, felt to me like it would be something you'd find more in like Bjork than you would
Yeah.
with Rock Band at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. You could say the same about Tourniquet as well. Like,
Yeah,
just the way the chorus goes and everything in it, it does sound a bit Bjork.
yeah. Like even Tourniquet, which is actually a cover, which
Yeah.
I never knew. And I'm like, it really, like you said, there's a lot of lyrical stuff going on here, whether it be talking about like relationships, abuse, even stuff like suicide and sort of where do you go after there? Like, are you stuck in purgatory, or are you going to heaven, or are you going to hell? Like, that is such a interesting concept
Yeah.
for a song. And even talking about stuff like having songs where it's talking about obsession and fakeness
Yeah.
and kind of telling it, even songs from like a stalker's point of view.
Yeah.
It's like the lyrical concepts for even as young as she was when this was out, like this is stuff that bands would almost kill to write about this stuff and have it turn out as good.
Yeah, and the way, like, she incorporated all that stuff, and then it all kind of gets wrapped up at the end with Whisper, which
Yeah.
is all about death. Like, all of this stuff happens, and then it's like we just die in the end anyway. So
Yeah.
I think that was genius.
It is like the one, like, this was really a great experience going back listening to this album, because I think we kind of take a thing as where we think of after a certain year there was really no good music coming out.
Yeah,
Like this is kind of for me right around the time when, say, a couple years later, I pretty much was done with the radio and new music, and instead I went back, and in some ways I kind of regret that. But
right.
in some ways, I'm like, well, there was really nothing coming out at that time keeping me
Yeah.
listening. But
Well,
Evanescence,
yeah, to kind of depend on radio and stuff to show you new music is you can't really do that anymore anyways. So I can see why you were like, no, I'm done. I can't take any of this, because the radio went in a very horrible direction
yeah.
around mid 2000s.
Oh, it was like if you weren't new metal, if you weren't pop punk,
Yeah,
and if you weren't rap or hip hop, good luck.
yeah, exactly. So no one can blame you, Wayne. I think you made
No.
the right decision.
Yeah, like that's around the time I discovered Pink Floyd, and then that went off into a whole nother 2 or 3 year, just like you did probably with Evanescence.
Yeah,
That's what I did with Pink Floyd.
yeah, yeah,
Like so
yeah,
much. And yeah, it's interesting with the fact that really this album was mostly written by Amy Lee and Ben Moody.
yeah,
After this, Ben Moody leaves, Amy Lee stays, and it's really, I went back listening to this, and it's amazing how strong all of these songs are,
yeah.
even today.
Mm-hmm. And it surprises me as well how strong they are, because that writing process between the two of them it wasn't an ideal situation. Like, they couldn't actually sit down together and write, because they would end up arguing. Like, they just did not get along at all. So she'd have to write her part separately and he'd do the same, and they'd have to try and make them work together. And they did somehow. But like I said, you can see after Fallen how the writing process has become a lot smoother, and there's no kind of tension in the band either.
It's kind of that David Gilmour, Roger Waters style of writing
Yeah.
together, where sometimes you get gold, and this album, great. So since we got through that, if you had to grade this album, what would you grade it out of a scale?
That's really difficult, and I think it really depends on where you're at in life, how you kind of take this album. I think because I've been through a lot in the last few years, and a lot of the themes of this album resonated with me a lot. And the more I look back on it, the more I'm like, this was a really brave thing to bring out for the time, and the success of it was well deserved. So I would give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm up there with you. I kind of went 7 out of 10 because I feel in the middle it kind of loses you a little bit, but then it gets you back.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird going back early 2000s. Like, you have those almost, I call it, overly distorted vocals at times that come in.
Yeah.
And a lot of production from there. Like, I think this is a really well produced album, and like a lot of musicians say, like, your first album, it's your labor of love. It's always going to be like the thing you put the most work into.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it took them 3 years after this to release their next.
Well, I suppose they were kind of thrown into the ether when Ben Moody left. She was probably like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
But I think it worked in her favor that he left, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And I was actually shocked when I read that I believe My Immortal, the lyrics were written by Ben Moody.
Yeah, he wrote the lyrics as well for Haunted.
Okay.
Surprisingly, like, it's some story he came up with about a haunted house. So he was well able, and I mean, I feel like they could have definitely worked better together. I've heard he had a major attitude problem.
Yeah.
So it was just down to him being stubborn, I guess.
Yeah, the typical musician.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he wanted this to be his baby, but it was her baby, really, and they were just kind of fighting for that control.
Yeah, I look back on this album actually a lot better now, because actually I'd never listened to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Up until, like, I mentioned doing this with you, and that's one thing that I'll say is how many of these albums that we think were kind of like, okay, well, those are the big things, that's all that band is, going back revisiting it a few years later, and
you kind of looking in at it with a new perspective.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, actually this was very good.
This is actually very dark for an album around the time that was kind of championed a lot by teenagers, young adults. Because like the themes in here are just like so mature for.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you'd be expecting someone with loads of life experience to come out and write music like this, but I'd say she kind of watched a lot of TV and movies and kind of darker stuff like that to come up with these things at her age. But then again, she did go through a lot. I mean, her little sister dying at 3 years old, which is what Hello was about. And, I mean, she has dealt with a lot. So there's that too,
Yeah, I kind of understand that because I remember growing up, like where I was, there was like only 3 TV stations. So you kind of got what was ever on TV.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was very more mature subject matter. And my parents never did hide me from that
Mm.
or shelter me. They're like, no, this is what the world is. Like even the news, like something is, kids would say, oh man, that stuff's boring. They would still sit me down and make me watch it because they're like, well, you have to still know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's something that as we grow and evolve, and that maybe that's something that's been lost with time.
It is, yeah, absolutely. People are very avoidant of reality these days.
Yeah.
And they're able to do that, like with social media and everything. They can just avoid all what's really going on and go into their own little world, you know?
Yeah. And yeah, so I was always probably more mature than a lot of kids my age because of that. Like,
Yeah.
and yeah. But anyway, this has been fun, Amy. Tara. This has been all this thought about Amy Lee, and it's like, yeah.
Yeah. No,
It,
this was great, Wayne. Thank you very much for having me on.
oh, not a problem. Like next week or the next episode is going to be with Tom Curlis of Curlis Mania.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to
Fantastic.
be talking about Rust Never Sleeps by Neil Young.
Okay. Unusual one.
Yeah, for him, he was like, I kind of put it out kind of like I did to you. What's an album you want to talk about? And he gave me like a bunch of albums. And I'm like, you know what? Talk about Rust Never Sleeps by Neil Young, because that was actually my first Neil Young album
Nice.
I ever heard. So anyway, nice having you here. Definitely glad to have you back. What is going on with Spinning Prog?
So I'm kind of trying to dive into whatever I feel like, pretty much. I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself. I have a video coming up I'm just talking about fusion in the video and different types of fusion and prog.
Awesome.
So I'm kind of taking radio shows I've done on prog radio and discussing the theme behind them even more. And of course, I have plenty of videos coming with Cody. I'm going to be doing one with Amy Fox in February, talking about lyrics and what they mean to us and stuff like that. So it's going to be fun, like just a lot of random stuff.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. The lyrics one is really interesting because as prog fans, like it seems prog fans get really into the music,
Yeah,
but it's the lyrics behind it that at times kind of gets lost. And
that's it. And we're girls, so we're all about the lyrics and stuff.
like that's one thing I love about who is it? Roger Waters. Like that's something that always gravitated me towards Pink Floyd was the lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it was nice having you here, Tara. Feel free to come on anytime. I'll probably reach out to you about what other albums you want to talk about.
Cool. Thank you so much, Wayne.
Not a problem. And like always, just want to have a conversation. Like
Yes.
that's more so important. That it's one thing to read off all these facts and try to outdo one another with the information, but sometimes it's just great to sit down, have a conversation, and talk to people.
Yes, I agree.
Anyway, thanks for joining me, Tara. This should be uploaded, I'm hoping sometime probably Wednesday.
Okay.
Next week. I'll send you a link to it and everything. And
fantastic. Yep.
Anyway, bye everybody.
Bye.